All right, hello and welcome everyone. It is episode 13 of the Planeswalker Pod. I am joined by Jason. I'm wearing a hat backwards, Florent, and and Danny T. Law, of course. And before we get started, I want to say thank you to our great sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc. If you haven't heard of them, they sell Magic cards, they buy Magic cards. Anything to do with Magic cards that you would like to buy. And then they've also got other games, right? So they've got Pokemon, they've got, just check them out, coolstuffinc.com. Thank you to them. And so we're just going to dive into it here. We're going to talk a bit about tournament preparation. Obviously, we've got a lot of our listeners are going to be participating in that Mythic championship qualifier. That's what they're still calling it right now, right? The Mythic championship qualifier. So we're playing in those on Arena. If you were top 1,200 in the ladder, going to try to spike a qualification to, and so we're going to talk about that and maybe some helpful preparation tips and so let's get into it. I know, Jason, you've been kind of. I think all of us. I mean, right now we're getting ready for the holidays, right? Like I've got my Christmas tree set up. I'm thinking about what I'm going to eat. I've got my Switch that I'm just like, all right, I'm not playing. I'm not, as much as I want to be playing more Sultai on Arena. No, I'm playing the Switch. Let's be real. But like, no, I know some of us are like kind of like, whether we're a little bit down or just kind of like mentally not as focused on the game. Sometimes that happens, right? Like there's ebbs and flows. There's going to be times where it's going to be more interesting, I think, to play and to be involved in, and also like a couple months after the last set comes out, it's like sometimes you reach a state like we are in Historic where the format is becoming a little bit more solved than it was a month ago, so I think there's just a combination of factors that have kind of led us to the place where we're at, where we're just kind of sometimes you have to push yourself a little bit harder to focus on Magic, focus on your preparation, focus on it. If you want to do well, right? If that's your goal, if you got a tournament coming up this weekend, right before the holidays. So let's just kind of dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, I also want to agree. I think in general, in most cases and hobbies and whatever, in December, it's always slow, right? I mean, I cannot imagine something where you have because you cannot invest an entire month because there's holidays and you also want to see a new year, and this year was kind of crazy. So everyone is like, give me that 2021. And it's just, there are many factors why like we or other people are a bit more like slow, I would say, more in the end. But let's jump into the preparation. Yesterday I was in our Patreon Discord and I saw like people doing splits. So it was really interesting for me to see. They all went together, they talked about it, and then they split up in different teams and played against each other. I just want to go off here. What is the general preparation you do, Seth? I mean, I can imagine it depends from tournament to tournament, how serious it is, how many people are involved in the preparation. What do you think is like the best to go, and is there a blueprint for it?
Yeah, I mean, so there's definitely a little bit of a difference, I'll be honest, in terms of what I should do and what I do. And I think that's probably the case for everyone. Like you have goals that you set and you don't necessarily reach them. There's definitely a lot of factors that I don't think people are necessarily thinking about when they're going into preparation. And so if I start listing off things that I do, I'm probably going to forget something. But I would say figuring out if I'm with a group is kind of like that. Sometimes I'm working with a specific group of testers. So like figuring out people who I can talk to or to bounce ideas off of, to play games with. That is something that's very important to me that I prioritize. But at the same time, it's not necessarily something that's available to everyone. So that being said, you all can join the Planeswalker Pod team. And so you So you get what I'm saying. So you can do that.
Okay, nice segue. Nice segue.
But I'm
Really well done.
but other than that, other than joining the team, it's not like it's easy to find people to test with or to to work with. So I do think it's important to have that. And yeah, like it's definitely helped me. Sometimes it does mean, if I'm taking it super seriously, that when someone outside of my testing group comes to me and says, "Hey, Seth, can I know what you're going to play at your next event, or what you're testing, or what you think about this?" I'm like, well, I've already made the commitment to this group that I'm going to test with them, and that doesn't mean I can share everything with the world, right? Sometimes you're just in a little bit of a bubble in that way, but it's worked for me in the past. So, yep, figuring out who I'm going to test with, that hopefully happens as early as possible, right? You want to have that established. You don't want to be a week before figuring out who's you're going to have to play games with. That can be something that's done, weeks or months ahead of time. So you have that already established, and then you have your content. What I mean by content is you have things that you're able to consume on the internet, whether it's streams, whether it's articles, whether it's whatever it may be. It could be metagame breakdowns. So looking through results of tournaments, statistics, all of that stuff matters. So it's not just sitting there and playing games. It's breaking that down, figuring out, like for me, establishing a metagame, decks that I'm expecting to play against is huge. It's massive, because once you do that, then you know what to target. You know what to target in your gameplay, right? Because if you don't have that, then all of a sudden it's like you could be randomly playing on the ladder, or you like. I think playing on the ladder is fine, but it's definitely not something you should use as your sole preparation. You want to have those targeted testing games. I know it's hard because people just kind of enjoy ranking up. They like getting to Mythic, trying to see how far you can go. That's fun. Finding a buddy to play some games of like a specific matchup, that can be a little bit stressful or tedious or like whatever. I don't think and it takes work just to set it up, so it doesn't happen as much. But I think there's a lot to be learned from that. So like if you're playing Sultai against goblins or whatever, just like a sample matchup where it's like you could play it on the ladder, you could play it on this, but I mean just having a good feel for the most important matchups is super important. I feel like I like to keep some amount of data ish. If I'm best practices involve some sort of data, so that especially if you're testing over a long period, you have stuff to reflect back on, but you also want to see how lists change, how metagames evolve. As I've mentioned with Jason and to you, I believe as well, Danny, as the tournament approaches, I think that the preparation becomes even more important because you get a better idea of the metagame. And you can't necessarily do that a month before. So you can get a feel for it, but as it's going to get increasingly more important, your time spent. And so my time spent preparing is at an incline. Excuse me.
Yeah. So let's just sum this up shortly. So first, you want to find a team you can rely on, maybe you already have some experience with, right? Then you need to find the good timing, so not too early, but not too late, so you can see the metagame, and then having correct content and finding data. So those four are basically keys for a good testing team, right? And as you said, not everyone has access to it, but you can maybe take one step away or one part away, and you still can check your data, you can play on the ladder, you can get your reps, you can see the meta, you can get a feeling for yourself. And here in the Planeswalker podcast team, I also saw basically this. Like the people, they grouped up, they split up. I watched games with Sultai against Goblins, I saw Sultai against Sultai, there are multiple or like Rectal Sacrifice. I saw like all the decks they will playing against each other to get the feeling of the rep. And everyone obviously is comfortable in their deck, even though they're a completely different deck. But while talking with them, I think it's really important to them. They said, I think being comfortable with the deck is definitely one of the biggest parts. And I think that is also the biggest part for me usually. Obviously, I want to have a lot of reps with the deck because that makes you feel more comfortable, right? But once you invested so much time in something, it's hard to switch.
Yep. And I think outside of that, because I'm remembering more things as we go into it, those are like the core things. I think that I already mentioned the like most important aspects, but at the same time, here's some other things that people don't necessarily think about, right? Time management. Time management is also really huge, I think, for testing. Figuring out when you're going to be playing the games. You don't want to let the games consume you, but you also want to make time for them. And you want to, as you lead up to the tournament, you want to figure out, make sure the logistics. What I mean by logistics is people have had arena crash because they're playing on a laptop, right? Make sure you have your setup, small things like that, but like make sure your internet's okay. Make sure this, because you don't want to be scrambling, on the day of the event with, realizing you have bad internet. You want to make sure you've on the day of the tournament, you're eating properly. You want to make sure once you have the deck lists that you are looking through them, because sometimes you'll get deck lists like the day before an event, or you want to make sure you're realizing differences in deck lists from what you tested, so you can sort of try to make adjustments on the fly, because some of that preparation has to be, you only have a minute or two just looking at the deck list. Sometimes it's closed deck lists. So there's a lot of things that come up that are like small things that people don't necessarily think about preparation wise. Some people like to take, if they're going to a tournament, they like to take notes. Like that doesn't happen as much on Arena, but people do take note. They bring pads of papers and they're writing down stuff. Now, I don't like to do that because I think it takes away from the actual games themselves. But so there's a lot of different aspects to preparing, and I think people approach it differently. It's probably depends a little bit more about how competitive you are, I guess, as well.
Yeah, those little things that you're talking about, making sure your laptop's good, or your computer, making sure your internet access is good, making sure that you eat well, making sure that you get enough sleep. These are things that, people kind of just brush over or take for granted or whatever, but they're very, very important. Sleep, especially your health.
Yeah, you don't want to have to go to the bathroom like while you're sideboarding. Like I've seen people do that, but like it's like pretty rough if you're like if you're not able to put all your attention on the game. Sometimes people are, it's easy to get distracted, especially during testing. You're not thinking about it as being very important. It's just, it's just a match or whatever. But like you want to be able to focus on the test games as much as you are going to be in the tournament. And so that's going to really be very helpful. It's so easy to lose focus playing a game of Arena, right? Like maybe you're eating, maybe you're talking to someone while you're playing, maybe you're, you're on the phone, but you want to finish up your game, right? Like there's all of these things that could happen where it's like, and because you're trying to fit it in, but that's the time management thing, right? That goes back to that, right? Because if you're staying organized, you've dedicated some time specifically. You've dedicated this time specifically to testing. That's what the time is for, right? And so that's what you should be doing. There shouldn't be all of these external, things going on. But I see a lot of that happening. I see a lot of just like kind of people, maybe they copy paste a deck and they're just kind of, it's just not, they're not fully into it. And I think that happens.
They're going through the motions.
Yeah, they're just going through the motions. And it happens to a lot of Magic players. And especially if it's not, people generally feel more comfortable with their own decks, right? So, or decks, there's certain decks where I think It's just like, all right, I clearly do this or I clearly do that, without thinking about it, and it goes through your mind, and it's often wrong. Like you're often doing it just like without fully thinking it through.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, I think so too. It's really nice. So when they were testing yesterday, I was watching some games, right? And I had my lines, they had their lines, and then we were like all watching. I think Richard playing Sultai, and me and Gavin, we had the same line, but he was like this, and then you have a discussion, right? Because for him it was like, yeah, it should be this, right? But then after we talked about it, it made total sense why the other line should be there, and it's so interesting because for you it's always correct, right? Not just in this one, but you did it so many times, right? But no one ever told you, hey, I think because of this and this, maybe the other thing is better to do. And in the end, you learn a lot this way. And if you do it alone, it's tricky sometimes, right?
Yeah, it certainly can be good and helpful to have someone to even watch your games. If you have access to that, to someone you can get on Discord and play a match and then have someone watch and talk about the match. I mean, that is awesome. That is really good. That's very helpful.
Yeah, I think that's like one of the untapped keys to improvement that people are not yet doing enough of like going back over and like watching tape, basically, is what you would call it in like sports or whatever.
Yep.
Like that's like a cornerstone of like the poker world, is like going through your hand history, reviewing them with other players, discussing them. That's like, I don't know, that's like everything there is that goes into competitive. There's a little bit of modeling as well, but that's something that's not really, we do it. People do it, mostly by themselves a lot. I think, though, that like the people that are going to go to the next level, like the next wave of professional Magic players, like that's going to be the next big step. And if you want to get like a leg up on the current competition, I think getting a team together and going back over videos of your play and of your testing to like tighten up your play and to figure out kind of, what's working and what's not in certain matchups. I think it's huge.
Yeah, I agree. It's basically the same as having someone just either you do it like that or you have your team that watches your game, right? You just someone who reviews it with you together, either live or after the game or maybe a couple of days later. But yeah, I think you're right. But it's a lot of time, right? And then we come back to time management.
I also think that watching so there's two different ways to watch coverage. I think coverage of Magic can be a way to prepare if you're watching it. It can also just be like a fun thing that you're just watching it and you just want to kind of relax and watch some coverage. I think those are two different things. So there is a way to watch coverage, I think, that's preparing. Like if you're going to, say, watch the MPL or Rivals matches, I think watching that stream without any talking or whatever, that's probably good preparation, right? Like seeing how these players sideboards, just watching the games, trying to understand how they think and really just kind of getting into it. I think watching a tournament.
Go ahead. Sorry.
So I think watching a tournament like that Wizards is broadcasting, listening to all of the commentators kind of joke around. Maybe there's some commercials. Maybe there's some ads. There's also people in chat kind of who don't necessarily know what they're talking about, making comments. You might be watching. All of these things are going to distract you from the actual games that are happening. So I don't think that type of that type of thing is fun. Like most people who watch coverage are on the main channel, right? There's like, tens of thousands of people watching those coverage matches. And I think they're doing it for the enjoyment. And I do it too. But I don't think it's the best way of preparing for a tournament and trying to get better as a player, right? So I just want to make that, make that distinguishing factor, because there's a lot of small things that you can really start to analyze and think about if you have to focus on it, though. And I think that so watching your own videos, I think mistakes in Magic are a lot of times you realize them as soon as you make them, or very soon after you're like, and you knew it. Like for the Arena Open, I made a mistake, cost me the Open, and that's fine. I knew it right as I did it. At the same time, sometimes going back and watching through things, especially if you don't know, but even if you do know, just just kind of looking through, trying to understand your thought process at the time, because you know what you did was wrong, but try to think about what you were thinking about back when you made the mistake. Like, why did you make the mistake? And try to analyze it from that perspective can be very helpful.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a lot of mistakes also. I think the reason that watching the video back with somebody else, or like getting a coach or whatever it is, there's mistakes that you don't notice also. Things that are like, strategy mistakes, for instance. Like, oh, you should have just played this card on this turn, and then these things would have sequenced out in this way. We talked about one in one of our team calls a while back, where my opponent had a 1/1 from a Lovestruck Beast, and I had like a 0/3 crab. And it was like, do I block? I was playing against Adventures. Like, do you block the 1/1 and they potentially stomp your crab that's kind of important to you? And if so, when? And I hadn't really thought about it at the time. I was kind of just like, okay, I think they might have stomp here. I'm not going to block. I take like an extra damage or two. And then when I was telling the story, we talked, I was thinking about it. I was like, oh, actually, if I had blocked on their turn 3, then even if they did stomp my crab, they wouldn't have been able to play a Lovestruck Beast on turn 3. And thus their whole curve would have been, disrupted, and their plan of beating me down with a 5/5 would have been one turn later. The game would have played out totally differently. And it's and then Seth, you pointed out that them stomping in that position even would have been the wrong play. So we were giving them an opportunity to make a mistake. And that was like really eye-opening for me, because that's such a small thing you think of at the time, right? It's like, do you block a 1/1 or not? And then also, when do you block the 1/1? Because if you block it on turn 2 and they stomp, well, now it's on curve and they can still play the Lovestruck Beast on turn 3. But if you block it on 3, then like I said, they can't play it. And so things like that are a lot more difficult to pick up, I think, in the moment, right? You're not like immediately punished for them. You have to like go back and like watch the tape, as well as like small mechanical errors and stuff. So I think those are really interesting things to pick up when you play with other people.
Yeah, I think this is something you learn if you play a lot, right? If you know both decks especially well, and you know what the options are, and then if you bait them into mistakes, which is something I think many try to do, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's how it works
to.
on a high level, right? You want to bait them into mistakes, and if you block there and they go for it, then you go like, yeah, I won this one. Yeah, you basically won that round, right?
Yep.
The next turn.
And it's a great point, Jason, that people make that's why you hire a coach. That's why you do stuff like that, to have people watch the games, is because of, and that's a huge reason. I've been doing a little bit of coaching myself. Of course, it's been with Sultai, because that's the deck that people are the most interested with. And I think that there's little things in playing a deck that you don't necessarily think about, right? Like, which land do you untap with Nissa? That can be a really tough thing. Little thing. Which land do you play on turn 1? Do you play the Triumph? Do you untap? Do you Thoughtseize? On turn 2, do you Growth Spiral in your main phase, or do you want to do it on their turn? There's all of these little decisions, right? The deck has a lot of decisions. It's not like a Goblins deck where it's like you're just curving and you're doing everything on your turn. Do you want to hold up a counter, or do you think this is the time to tap out for your Hydroid Crisis? So there's so many little decisions with the deck. I don't think it's one of those things where, do you crack your Fable Passage, or do you leave it in play because even though you don't have Fatal Push in hand, you can draw into it. That's one of the main ways that you trigger Revolt. Like, these are all things you need to be thinking about. It comes with experience from playing the deck. So like, someone that's just picking up the deck because they think that it is the best deck in Historic and they want to play the best deck, it's not actually necessarily the best move to do it. Maybe it's the best deck if you're able to pilot it perfectly, but there's so many different decisions. And, I went 2-2 with the deck, right, in the open. So it's not like the deck is unbeatable, and it requires precise gameplay. And it's very easy to we were just playing a game, and we tapped our Castle Locthwain when we shouldn't have, and then we couldn't draw a card. And it's like, okay, well, you can't draw a card. That's not a big deal, right? You just missed one card. It's like, well, no, that's like
a one card is a thing.
Having an extra card in a deck that's all about resources and exchanging one for one in managing
being
your
one card
mana.
deeper for the rest of the game.
Is absolutely a big deal. So it's a deck that if you want a deck with a lot of little decisions, Sultai is the deck to play. If it's a very challenging deck from that perspective, and I do like it in that way.
Yeah, it was fun. One game was also Goblin against Sultai, and I told them this is actually the perfect game to rewatch again, because the hand he had there were so many decisions at any point of the game. Like, should I do this? Should I save damage? But then, and like, there's just so many things went through, and every one of us was like, okay, yeah, and it was really interesting because it would be nice to see what would have happened if we start with a different line and then we go to the scenario. The entire game would have maybe unfold differently, right?
Yeah.
Like those games are the perfect one to rewatch, I think.
And also just having someone to watch and kind of talk about sideboarding can be very interesting. I don't think sideboard guides. People rely on them way too much. Especially the problem is players pick up a deck and they have the sideboard guide and they just solely rely on that, and it happens all the time. Especially if you're just picking up a deck. For this weekend, I want to do well with Sultai. I'm going to pick it up and do well because I have the sideboard guide. That's not going to work because you're going to run into situations and cards that deviate from the guide, and it's going to happen all the time. So you want to understand why certain cards are there for certain matchups, but you're also going to have disagreements about how to sideboard and. But it's such a tricky aspect of the game.
Yeah. Especially closed deck list, right? Closed deck list sideboarding is you have to understand the meta. You have to know exactly what's going on.
It's really hard, especially in a deck like Sultai, right? Sultai's got a lot of different cards you can board in, and it's oftentimes it's easy for people to establish a good card, right? But it's really a lot more difficult for players to figure out what cards to take out of their deck. And exactly. A lot of the times it's like, well, why aren't you playing? What's wrong with Hydroid Crisis? It's like, it's hard to sometimes answer that question but you're asking it without looking at, well, what card in your deck do you want the Crisis over? Like, why are you, and then you think about, well, I have 3 Narsets in my deck now post board. So it's like, well, I want stuff to find with Narset, or I want this and that. And so it's a question, but it's not a fully thought out question from the perspective of, figuring out, well, there's a reason why Krasis isn't in. So, but that's just one example. There's so many different options. Like, I board out Maelstrom Pulse in the mirror, right? It's like, well, why is Maelstrom Pulse bad in the mirror? Well, it's like Maelstrom Pulse isn't bad, but it's not as good as this card, so that's kind of what happens, especially in these metagames that start to become more solved, where now everyone just wants the best possible list for the mirror, right? Like, you're going to do whatever you can to beat the Sultai mirror, and so it's like, if you can play an 8 instead of a 7, you're going to do it, right?
Also, interesting part about the Maelstrom Pulse. In a classical Sultai list, you will not see a Scanta, right? Well, what happens if you see a Scanta game 1?
Well, yeah,
then
exactly.
Suddenly,
yeah,
you know what I mean? It suddenly changes everything. And in a closed deck list, you have to be able to make those decisions on fly, right? If you have a guide that says board out Pulse against Sultai, but opponent plays like 2 Scanta main and you have no answer to it, no, you should not do that.
I mean,
like, it's just
yeah.
You know what? It's if anyone's ever played poker before, it's like a hand chart, like a starting hand chart. It's like, oh, you play these hands in this position. And it's like, if anyone that's ever played before, it's like, it's not that simple. Like, that's just like a nice guide to like a general strategy. But there's lots of factors that can wildly deviate what you would do during a hand of poker. It's the same in Magic, just like the guys were saying. You need to be able to think on the fly. Though I will say,
but I'm not folding aces pre-flop. I'm not going that far.
I know you being giddy enough. No, I don't know. That beats incoming.
I lost
once. Are gone.
I lost once the tournament when I was like 19 or 20, and I had like double ace pre-flop, and opponent had like nothing and fished the street on the river on the turn.
So we lose Danny. Danny's bad beat story
Cool
was
guy,
so
cool
bad
guy.
he broke the internet.
Cool guy.
Oh, okay, he's back.
Literally. Yeah, I'm back. Just a story. I lost my first tournament with double ace in the first round. Because someone fished a street, right? And I was like, okay. I went away.
You
Should have
can
played
tell
around.
Danny hasn't played that much poker. That's fine.
I didn't play. I lost. But that was not fun.
Okay, so I will say this though. You always hear people kind of poo-pooing on cyber guides, and we've explained why. But they do have a use. They're not completely useless.
Yeah.
And like all information, which is kind of something I want to touch on next, it depends where you get it from and how valuable it can be. So especially if you've never played a deck before, if you're going in cold, sometimes it happens. Sometimes people don't have time to prepare for a tournament, and having at least some sort of backbone, skeleton, deck guide to work off of is something. You don't have to follow to the letter like we're saying, but it's nice to have some basis. And then also sometimes you can extrapolate kind of what people are thinking from the cyber guide. Like, oh, you take Crisis out in the mirror, for instance. Oh, maybe it's because, we're also bringing in Nissas, Narsats. Our opponent's probably bringing in Narsats. So maybe they're going to get blanked. Okay, I can kind of see like what people are thinking. So they do have like some uses. And I feel, I've heard a lot of people complain that pros are a lot of times poo-pooing on cyber guides. They don't understand why. We've kind of explained why, but I kind of want to give both sides of the coin, but they do have some use.
I agree that they have use, and I shouldn't say that they don't. And if I gave that impression, I apologize. I think that they have use to the point that they help you understand the deck. I ask for sideboard guides all the time for decks that I don't play with that much. Like for the Esper Yorion deck that I took to the last tournament, I was like, "Hey, LSV, can you give me a sideboard guide?" And he wrote me up a sideboard guide. So like I'm gonna take that guide. And did I sideboard exactly the way it was in the guide? No, I didn't. So that's my point. Is that you use this guide and you and we've just made the point. So we've all said it a bunch of times,
and the real point is that Seth Manfield greater than sign LSV. Stick name.
No.
That's how you win. You just phone up LSV. You're like, hey bro, can I get that? That deck list and cyber guide, and then away you go.
Sometimes you look at like a lot of the things are expected, but sometimes you look at a matchup and something unexpected happens. Like maybe if you're looking at my guide and you go to the matchup against the blue-white auras, you're like, oh wow, he's boarding in his Narsets there. I wouldn't have necessarily thought to bring in Narset or something like that. That can sometimes you look at a sideboard guide and something clicks in a way that it wouldn't have if you hadn't seen it. So it makes you think in a different way about a matchup. And I think that can really be very helpful.
Also, what I like about sideboard guide is, I played a lot of Sultai back when we prepped for your MIQ, the one you won. And we had the sideboard, I had the sideboard guide of Javier, and just doing those things he does and then realizing after I played it multiple times, why he made those decisions, right?
Yep.
Like, because you see it on paper and you go like, yeah, okay, but you could have one more of this maybe, but then you just play with the way he would do it and then it works out. Obviously you have to adapt because mine was closed again. So you have to adapt and you just take the idea behind and adapt it to the current situation.
Yep.
Yeah. So speaking about, getting this information, before I had a team to sort of prepare with, I felt like I was sort of like the average, I think what the average kind of like PTQ, GP grinder kind of did. I kind of played online and then I just looked at all the stuff that was online. So like Star City Games, Channel Fireball, a little bit of streamers, a little bit of, a little bit of Twitter, Reddit, just kind of trying to find information anywhere that I could. And I didn't realize sort of that this is a bit of a detriment or a bit of I never really got ahead of the curve by doing this. And so I kind of want to talk about maybe pitfalls. We talk about the things that you should be doing right, but I feel like there's a lot of things that people do that are, I don't know about wrong, but they're, harmful to their success that maybe they don't even realize that they're doing. So, one of the things is getting information only from, kind of other people on the internet. Almost always some large percentage of time, the articles that you're reading on strategy websites, like they're only going to be relevant for a very short period of time, because then everyone else is going to read them, and then everyone else is going to have that information too, and then the meta is going to change going forward quite quickly, if it hasn't already. Or looking at results from the last weekend tournament, well, everyone else will see those results, and the meta will start to change, and it's going to be different by the next weekend.
I think this is a huge point. This is actually a big point with how up to date the article or the video, whatever it is you watch. Funny story, I was just before the podcast, I got a comment on a YouTube video on the first Rogue deck before the Mill Rogue was out.
Mm-hmm.
And the person asked if the deck is good against deck A, B, and C, right?
Yeah.
And I was reading that comment like, look, man, this is an older deck, and like, it's crazy, right? So people actually do that. So it's really important to point that out, I think.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, and that's and you should know better if you're looking at older. A lot of times, also, if you write an article, like you'll see the guides on CFB or whatever. It's like those are guides that happen after the tournament. They're not for the tournament. So they're outdated a lot of times. Like they're from the week before. Like if you, I actually just wrote another Sultai guide for this week. Because there's differences from my version that I wrote last week. I literally wrote Sultai and then Sultai again because the deck changed enough. The deck changed enough that I felt like I wanted to talk about like Tails End. I wanted to talk about some things in the sideboard that I would like these things that I felt like mattered, because if you just looked at my deck from my list from 2 weeks ago or a week ago, it's different than it is now, and I didn't want people to get to fall into that trap. And so, but it's really hard to have that up-to-date content from someone who is very knowledgeable on the subject. It turns out there's not that many knowledgeable people about Sultai that are writing on the internet. Like, you can't always find the right content, and I think people struggle with that, and maybe that's why that Sultai wasn't like that. I don't know why it wasn't that heavily played or whatever, because I've always thought it was the best deck, and I don't even know what's good against the deck. And I've been saying this for the past 6 months, and it's never changed. But like, no one else has been saying it. Like, I couldn't go to, like, there's been maybe a couple people streaming it or doing this or that, but like, it's not like there's sometimes you just have to. You have to hunt for that content, because sometimes there's only one possible place you can get it, or there's no place you can get it.
Also, what's interesting is because the deck is older now, right? Content creator in general and pro player who stream as well, they will not stream that deck again. They go like,
it's not fun anymore.
I did that. I did that. I don't have to update it. Yeah.
Yeah, especially if you're not, like, for me, I think it's fine because I'm like now known as like the Sultai guy. I think it's fine for me to stream it. People will ask me, but like, if Jason were to start streaming it, he might not get as much credit with the deck, street cred, I guess.
It's more like you go and see like, oh, another person playing Sultai on stream, right? Like there are certain decks that all people played on stream once, but then to do it again is always a bit tricky. If the deck changes enough, if there's like one really cool card in the deck that maybe makes it different, sure, but sometimes there's just small things, right? Interaction, like there a little bit, you change that counter, you do this because of this meta. It's not enough to make it new content, but enough to make it so detailed that you can write a guide about it. So That is why I think sometimes the information is not everywhere.
Yeah, those are really good points too. And to also touch more on streaming, to not just poo-poo on articles, streamers are often there to entertain. They're there to entertain their viewers, and it's not entertaining typically to play whatever the best deck is, play Omnath for a month or, whatever the broken deck is over and over and over again. People get kind of tired of it, right? They want to see new things. And so there's a few things to take away from that. One, just because no one's playing a deck, like say Sultai, doesn't mean it's good. And the opposite coin is true too. If people are playing a certain deck and they're winning on the ladder with it, and I see people do this all the time, they're like, oh, at 6-1 with freaking red black ham sandwich deck.
I saw he went on a 10-0 run with the deck, so now everyone's playing it. Like if one of the big streamers does it, it's like Gavin Steve, he won 10 matches in a row with this deck. It's like, all right. And now everyone's playing it on the ladder because they want to try it, right?
No.
Yeah. And so this brings back, so this is two important points. One is like, don't like be fooled kind of by that sort of bias, because streamers are oftentimes not playing what they think is the best deck for winning. A lot of times they're trying things out, they're having some fun, they're experimenting with different card choices or deck types. And two, because they're doing that on the ladder, everyone else is doing that on the ladder too. Your opponents are not Seth Manfield playing Sultai. A lot of times people are just picking it up. It could be. Sometimes it is. They could be. A lot of times someone picking it up, trying it because they think it's the best deck. So they might not be playing it very well. You might be like, oh, I went 4-2 against Sultai. Well, half those players might have not been playing the deck very well or been new to it. Also, when you go on those 10-0 runs, well, same thing. You got players just picking up new decks because that's what's fun. And that's what people are doing. Or you got people experimenting and trying stuff out themselves. So ladder runs are also, and also people will base their own results too, right? How many times do you see people be like, oh, I got like a 65% win percentage over 100 games or something on the ladder. Like, I got to play this deck.
Yeah, starting at bronze. It's like,
Well, yeah. I mean, the numbers. I think it's you have to see the context, right? If you played in high mythic, right? If you played in high mythic, like my record with Reclamation was 130-21.
That was very good.
So that was my record as number 2. I was always number 2 with that record, so I never managed to go to number 1. But after that, I was like, the deck is good.
Yeah, then I was enough. That was good enough.
Yeah, and that is when you met me, right? And you saw me doing this stuff.
And then you stopped playing Reclamation for some reason. You started.
Yeah, everyone was playing Reclamation.
Well, you were streaming it, and you were like, "Well, once everyone started, once it became all Reclamation mirrors, it started to become a little less interesting."
Yeah, it's fun if you then we put the rolls outburst in, people do this. Then we do this, people do this. Like, okay, I'll stop playing this deck. And then the Luca thing started, and then I played Luca an entire day. Did the same, like. Okay, everyone is playing.
Yeah.
And then as a content creator, you do that, right? But if I would say it is really important to see the context. If you play the percentage in Mythic, right, and you get a feeling how good your opponent is, right? Because you always think they could do X and Y, and if they do something completely unlogical, then okay, this is win. I will not put in my statistics. It's just because I got a freebie, right? But then again, in a closed arena, this can happen as well. I mean, sometimes you win there and you go like, okay, yeah, I take that one, right? So sometimes the ladder maybe matches with the closed arena, right? Because the people come from ladder as well. So in that, you basically tested the same environment as you will play in the end, right? But if you test for a tournament where, maybe some are better, some are not, but they are tournament players, and you prep differently. I think this is also important.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Depending on what tournament you're playing in. For sure, the MIQs, I kept thinking of them like they were going to be like in a Star City Games or Grand Prix or Pro Tour or something. They are not. They're very different. Thousands and thousands of players that have qualified in a multitude of different ways, playing limited sometimes, qualifying through other tournaments like the SCG. And so you're going to face, just a wide variety of decks, and you got to be prepared for that for sure. Another thing that I wanted to comment on, sort of like mindset a little bit. Seth, you mentioned, at the beginning of the podcast, that, sometimes towards the end of the year, things start getting, a little slower and stuff, and it's a little bit more of a grind. If, depending on how competitive you want to take Magic, sometimes something I've realized recently is that, sometimes it's not fun. Sometimes it's work. And that happens when you turn your hobby into your, pseudo career, or your side hustle. And it's not fun always just playing Omnath or just playing Reclamation or whatever the best deck is that you kind of just can't really theoretically beat and then have a good percentage against the rest of the field. And so you kind of just play the deck everyone else plays, and you try to play as good as you can, and you hope the cards kind of fall your way. And that's just part of the game that I think that, you sort of have to accept and kind of get over at some points. And I think it's hard for people to do.
Yeah, I think I've gone through that as well. I've gone through a similar issue where sometimes I will find what I believe to be the best deck, but then I won't actually play it enough to just have a good enough reps with it. Like if we go back to and part of that is because I'm either down on the game or I'm down on the deck or I just am not motivated for whatever reason. Like if I go back to I'm trying to remember what it was. It was like
So when you played Orzhov?
no, when I played the sack deck,
I wanted to say
the Jun sack deck. I'd really not played that with that deck at all. And so that was a big tournament, right? 25K for first place. It was basically the biggest tournament of this year. But for some reason, I was motivated testing. I was testing mostly standard because standard was new. It was exciting to me. So I worked on the blue black rogues deck quite a bit. And I spent a lot of time on that. I spent a little bit of time on historic, trying other things and like kind of hitting my head against the wall. And then at the last minute, because of people I was testing with were playing Junsack, I was just like, sure, I'll just register Junsack. If they say Junsack's good, I believe that. Played a few games, thought it was good. And literally, it was just a few games. I literally played 3 or 4 games with the deck, and then I was because I didn't like the deck, and so then I could have, after I registered it, I had like 5 days where I could have been on the ladder playing Junsack, and like my EV was probably like a bunch of money if I just sat there and played just some Junsack matches. But I couldn't motivate myself to do it. And then I sit down and play the Junsack deck and just have no idea what I'm doing with it. I still went 4-0, but I felt like I got very lucky and I used up a lot of my like run goods in those matches. And so then like I just felt like all my run goods were gone, and they were. By the time I got to top 8, like I just got very unlucky in top 8, and I kind of just expected that would happen. So that can happen, and just play the matches. Sometimes you figure out that there's the best deck, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't play the matches. Even if you don't like it, do it.
Yeah. But going back to what Jason said, I think if so the dream thing is obviously if your hobby is your work, right? That's obviously your dream thing. But at one point, if your hobby is your work and you do it all the time, the relationship to the hobby changes, right? And depending on especially the time, like end of the year and all the struggle we have in real life, it can feel toxic sometimes. And I totally agree there. And I work with Magic all day as well, even though I didn't stream a lot. Believe me, I work a lot with Magic still. It can be hard, but it is important to find another balance for this, right? Like, is it another game? Is it just more free time until you maybe get fresh and new in the new year, right? And back to it again. And it feels like it felt before. There are multiple things to do there, but I agree. And the same with a deck. If you don't like it, you have to force it. And if you force something, it never feels as good if you don't. So finding the way to the point where we don't have to force it, again, is important. Is it with distraction, with just relaxing, just refreshing? There's so many ways to do it, and I think everyone has a different way to handle it. And yeah, that's just my statement to that.
Yeah, one of the things that's really helped me lately is something that Seth touched on, and it was kind of like time management. So instead of just like letting Magic just kind of like take over my life and just be like all I thought about and all I kind of did whenever I had time, and yes, also doing things like playing a game on the side while like, watching a video or scrolling the internet or doing something on the other side, and like not getting good results or really learning anything because my attention's split and I'm not paying enough attention. And then losing also compounds the frustration, or making mistakes. I found that blocking off a period of time, be like, okay, for this set amount of hours, I'm just going to play Magic. I'm going to test this matchup or try to find out this information that I need, prepare for this tournament, and then that's it. And it's like, okay, so I lock that time in. It's like punch in, punch out a little bit more. And then I'm going to go like, I don't know, freaking throw snowballs at some kids because I'm in Canada or something. Do something else with my time, and let go out of my mind. And then it's kind of nice then when I'm sitting down to play, I'm like, okay, this is what I'm doing, and I play my best, and it feels good. And then, like, after that set amount of time, okay, I'm done, and I go on. I know it's not going to last for forever, and I don't know. That's really helped me to kind of compartmentalize my time and my life a little bit. And I think that's helped with my stress with the game anyway.
All right, so I think we are going to wrap up our episode 13 of the Planeswalker Pod. We just want to thank you, all of our supporters, all of our Planeswalkers, and of course, Cool Stuff Inc. And we wish everyone who is playing this weekend good luck and happy holidays. We are going to be figuring out our time to record during the holiday break, and then also and we're going to be having our tournament. Definitely follow us on Twitter at Planeswalker Pod, and we're going to probably post an update on the tournament. We're looking forward to hopefully having a bigger turnout for that this time around. I think we said, what was it, the 28th or something like that?
27th, I think.
So yeah, that's when we're going to be having our Planeswalker Pod tournament.
Yeah, I hope to see you guys there. I think we're all going to be playing in it this time, so you'll have the chance to play against Seth, I Never Make Mistakes Manfield, or Danny, the Deck Doctor Tila. Also $500 Cool Stuff Inc. store credit on the line. Who knows? Maybe some other awesome stuff. There will be. Hope to see you guys there.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Yeah. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Awkward sign off. Yes.